Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, and this is a great way to kick off the 4th of July weekend. We'll probably have some things to say about that, but we're also going to look at the economy. We're going to look at a couple of Supreme Court decisions that will affect your faith and your family and your freedom. We'll also look at these troubling elections in the city of New York and what that might mean for the future, and maybe a couple other things having to do with everything from woke corporations to the military. And in studio with us today, Penna Dexter, as well as Dr. Merrill Matthews, resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation. And Penna, as always, lots to talk about.
Yes, there is. And I heard another radio show on the way here talking about the 4th of July and encouraging people to celebrate it even more than ever, even if you're just with your family or with your grandchildren or whatever, because there's so much teaching right now about the origins of our nation.
Yes.
And they aren't even when we thought they were. It's in 1619. So to just reiterate with our children what it really means and something to celebrate. And the date is July 4th. 1776. And, just that type of thing. So that encouraged me as I was driving down here to really plan that for my family this weekend.
So again, I want you to put out a flag if you haven't already put out a flag, and certainly recognize it's a great time to eat a hot dog, great time to watch fireworks, but also just an opportunity for teaching. I was going to come dressed up as George Washington, but this Sunday in my own class, I will be dressed as that, and we'll be talking about America founded on faith. So those are some topics that we
I'd like to see you as George Washington.
Oh, well, it is actually on the website, so you can probably find that if you dig hard enough, you'll find it. But Dr. Merrill Matthews, since you started speaking there, let's talk about this because I love some of your pieces. Oops, that darn debt ceiling is back. And it's a reminder that at a time when every time we turn around, the Biden administration's trying to figure out another few $1 trillion to spend, there is a roadblock, and it's the debt ceiling.
Right. The debt ceiling comes up on July 31st, so just a month away. And our listeners probably haven't heard about the debt ceiling much lately, and that's because as part of the Budget Act of 2019, they suspended the debt ceiling. And this goes back all the way to the beginning. Congress has the power of the purse. Congress has always controlled how much money is going to be in the debt and how much money they're to raise and so forth. That's always been the case. In 1917, as we were going into World War I, it changed a little bit, and they actually put a cap on the debt ceiling because there was a lot of people who did not want us to go into World War I, and they wanted to make sure we didn't spend too much money. So they started putting a cap on the debt. The total federal debt, and that's typically for the next several decades they would raise that without much trouble. It wasn't that contentious, but in the last couple of decades it has become very contentious, and in the last decade or so it has come to a point where they had been raising it. I think they've raised it 25 times since 1993, so it's a lot. But here recently they said instead of just raising it 2 or 3 times each year, let's just suspend it for a while and then we'll come back, and at the date that suspension ends, the debt ceiling will be whatever the federal debt is at that point, which is about $24.4 trillion right now. So that's where we are. It comes back, and come the end of July, unless Congress does something, we'll hit the debt ceiling, and that means the Treasury Department has to start scrambling to find ways to pay for things because they won't have any authority to go borrow more money and increase the federal debt.
Well, the question I always have, because in recent years, as you said in your article, Buddy, that we've had more debt ceiling battles, and they go right up to the end.
Oh, they do.
Why do they go right up to the end?
I still remember in 2011, they were having this battle in July, the summer, and Doug Holtz-Haken, used to be the head of the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, was asked in testimony, when do you think this will end? He said Congress was scheduled to go on August vacation the next week. He said, I think it will end when Congress's vacation comes up. And it ended that day.
And it always does.
That very day.
Now, give some people a chance to kind of get a feel for what this looks like. So I've right now on my computer put usdebtclock.org.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, when you do that, first of all, it scares me because you can see the U.S. national debt going tick, 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 tick. I mean, it's just flying by, 20
28.4 trillion.
Yeah, 28.474. What you will also see here is the federal tax revenue, 3.5 trillion. The amount of spending, 7 trillion. And so again, we're spending twice as much as we're bringing in tax revenue. But they also have some other things in terms of the debt ceiling or the relationship of the debt to gross domestic product.
Right.
1960 it was 52%. In 2000 it was 57%. Now it's 128%, which many people say once it gets that high, there's no coming back. So you can see there's a very good reason why to actually have a debt ceiling. But when that is taken seriously about as much as the speed limits on the freeway, you can see why we find ourselves where we are.
And let's introduce a second term, the deficit. So the annual deficit is how much money we're spending over what we take in
each year.
So there's the deficit, and the Congressional Budget Office just released they expect the deficit this year to be about $3 trillion.
Right.
That's a little bit less than the $3 trillion it was in the last fiscal year, but it's 3 times what it was in 2019.
Yes.
So, and then that accumulates, and that's how you get to the $28.4 trillion each year as that deficit increases. And the CBO is projecting it will decline over years. I will see if that happens.
Yeah, because COVID has precipitated a lot of spending, but COVID is really not doing that anymore, but we're still spending.
Yes.
I do have one thing to point out from what you wrote, Dr. Matthews, and that is one reason why we don't talk about it very much is because the Democrats are worried that the attention to how much money they are spending and President Biden is spending is, that's not wanted. That's an unwanted attention. And so it's not discussed, because I remember other years discussing it
Discussed a lot, right.
Yeah.
And I'd like to say that the Republicans were much better on spending when they were in charge, but they weren't much better. Maybe a little bit better, but not much.
As I've jokingly said so many times before, both were driving us off the cliff. One was going at 100 miles an hour. The other one might have been going 60 miles an hour. But unfortunately, as we have said on this program so many times, every single year, the national debt increased. Whether you had a Republican president or a Democratic president, a Republican-controlled Congress, a Democratic-controlled Congress. But to be fair, the Democrats have been spending it a lot more. And the Biden administration seems to not even have in their mindset the fact that this is now being spent like it's monopoly money.
Yeah, it just seems like they want to spend. It's almost like they're trying to spend as much money as they can. And I really, truly think they are, because it's a method of
absolutely.
control. And, they say that they're going to pay for some of these big programs with taxes. So if you do that, do you still have to raise the national debt until the tax money actually comes in?
I don't think much of what they're saying is going to pay for it will actually pay for anything.
I don't
but
either.
maybe we'll talk about that when we come back from the break.
I guess we need to come back from the break. We'll talk a little bit more about economics. Then we're going to talk about this rather interesting election in New York. And I love the opening line by John Funn. For decades, the American Idol and Eurovision TV talent shows have calculated millions of votes during commercial breaks without a hitch. But it only took a few hours this week for the New York City, the largest city in the United States, to demonstrate just how incompetent local officials can be. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Sadly, it has become trendy in some circles to say that the world would be a better place without religion in general and Christianity in particular. I really do wonder if professors, commentators, and people on social media really believe this, or just saying it without any serious reflection. As I like to sometimes say to my atheist acquaintances, I see lots of Catholic hospitals, Presbyterian hospitals, and Baptist hospitals. I've never seen a humanist hospital. In his new book, Unimaginable, What Our World Would Be Like Without Christianity, Jeremiah Johnson explains what the world was like before Christianity and what the world would be like without Christianity. He then concludes by talking about the benefits in a world with Christianity. He was in my radio studio talking about the influence of atheism on our world, and then concluded by talking about the positive influence from Christianity in our world today. For example, there are an estimated 350,000 religious congregations in the United States, and the vast majority of them serve in some capacity as a community safety net for those in need. We also see churches and faith-based organizations helping out in disasters. So what is the economic impact of faith in America? According to one study cited in the book, religion's $1.2 trillion impact is more than the global annual earnings of Apple and Microsoft combined. Or you can look at it another way. How much do we save in social services because these are performed by faith organizations? Rodney Stark of Baylor concludes that the total current savings to U.S. society is $2.67 trillion. The book's facts and figures are a vivid reminder that the positive impact of Christianity in society is indeed unimaginable. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition in studio today, Penna, Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews. And if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Going to talk about some of the election results in New York City a little bit later this hour, and also some very important decisions coming down from the Supreme Court, both 6-3 decisions. But Dr. Matthews, for just a minute, let's come back to spending, because you have some of the numbers there for things like the infrastructure bill, as well as all sorts of things that actually are mandatory spending in the budget. Talk about that.
So when they came up with the bill, they set aside how much they wanted to spend on various things. And then when they came to the other part, which is how we're going to pay for this, they don't put any numbers on there. They just have notions. So I'm reading from the draft that they've been using. Infrastructure Financing Authority to leverage private investment. I don't think that does anything. Reduce the IRS tax gap. That is, this is Joe Biden's deal. If we think the rich aren't paying enough of what they're supposed to be paying, and so we're going to spend $1.5 billion on the IRS to hire more people to go and check those returns. Redirect unused unemployment insurance refunds. I'm for that.
I am.
I don't think it's going to be nearly as big as they think it is. Repurpose unused COVID relief funds for infrastructure. I'm with that. So there's a few things in there where you're repurposing money, but there's almost nothing in there about how you really pay for this. Now, Lindsey Graham said, I believe yesterday, that he's getting on the pay-fors committee to try to figure out how they're going to pay for it. But they don't really have a way to pay for it. And Bernie Sanders has come up and said, why even worry about that? Let's just borrow the money and pay for everything, and we'll just borrow it all.
And then we have actually printed more dollars in the last couple of months than we have in all the years previous. So, I mean, it's just unbelievable because the value of the dollar keeps dropping. Penna?
I think a lot of the Republicans are looking at the two different bills. Of course, Biden tried to tie them together and kind of got himself in trouble, saying that I won't sign the infrastructure bill until I get also on my desk my other families bill. And the families bill is all kinds of entitlements. And this is what I've seen lately in the Wall Street Journal. Biden's plan for an entitlement society. It's the entitlements stupid. A lot of this is not just one-time spending.
Right.
It's guarantees. And, they say 10 years or whatever, but once you put something in there like daycare, paid family leave, whatever, you could never, they're forever. So you could never get it out. So it's really a change. It's a big change in the nature of America, our system. And another piece that the Wall Street Journal, I can't find it right now, but it talked about over half of the country will be now at the federal trough If Biden gets his way. It's going to be the federal government taking care of a lot of the middle class, too, in addition to the poor in the country, in addition to that safety net. And that's been their plan all along. That's really what they wanted.
And I would say not just the middle class, because with Obamacare, you had been able to get health insurance, get some kind of subsidy if you were if your family four made a little over $100,000. I think they bumped it up to $120,000, $130,000. So that's what I call upper middle income families. And so it's you're seeing this happening.
Depending on where you live in the country, of course.
Depending on where you're living in the country. But it's the point is well taken, because the infrastructure bill is mostly one-time money. We're putting money out there to fix these roads, and then it's done. So when the CBO looked at the cost of this, they said we expect the deficit next year to be high too, but then we'd expect it to start declining, because they're not taking into consideration the other bill that the Democrats want to pay for, and there you get into the entitlements, which always grow significantly over time.
Mm. Well, again, we wanted you to hear a little bit about that, and that's that first article on the debt ceiling, and we covered a little bit more on finances, but I thought we'd move to our second article, if you don't mind, and this one is written by John Funn. Now, let me just mention that on July 13th, Dr. Merrill Matthews will be sitting in this chair, and you're actually going to be interviewing
John coming
Funn
on to talk about this.
But in case you would like to get a preview, it is, again, the New York election officials keep it stupid, and it has to do with the fact that there were some very, I guess you could say, election irregularities in the New York City vote, which is so convoluted that, Dr. Matthews, didn't you hear from John Funn that we may not know for some time who actually won the mayor's race in New York?
Right. He thinks it'll probably be mid-July before we know who won the mayor's race. And I would suggest it may not be then, because once you finally get the tabulations and the elections committee says, okay, we think this is who actually won the election, because of all these irregularities, I think almost any of the candidates, probably not Andrew Yang, but almost any of the other candidates would have a fair point of saying, I think we need to, I'm going to file a suit. I want to try to stop this, because I think maybe I was robbed of some of my votes, and force this thing into a lengthy examination of where we are, and I would suggest we may not know for a while.
I would think Eric Adams in particular might be the one to file that lawsuit.
Well, he's already filed one lawsuit because there was a big error in the test votes that were mixed in with the regular actual votes.
That's right.
And it took his lead down. He had a 10% lead and took it down to like 2%. He's still in the lead, and that's another interesting piece. We can talk about why, but it's just, to me, the longer the counting goes on after the election, the more opportunity there is for mischief to take place. And I think that this ranked choice voting that they're doing, where they go in and they rank the candidates, I mean, it's confusing for the voter, but it's looking like, and Kim Strassel said this today in her piece in the Wall Street Journal, that the election officials are even kind of confused, and they're not handling it well either. And I'm scratching my head, because there's several states and localities that do this and are thinking of doing it. They say that it's going to make it a less negative campaign, but I doubt it. Politics just tends to get negative.
It allows the election officials to have more control over the election. It's not how you vote, it's who count the votes and how they rearrange some of those. And it just kind of brings me back, when I wrote this booklet that we did last year on election fraud, all the examples I used, the contemporary examples, were from the Democratic primary. Because you around the table know only so well that if you talk about any kind of electoral mischief, and there is a fair amount of it, it's always said, well, then you actually want to implement all sorts of things with voter suppression. But in this particular case, or in the cases we used in the booklet, these are Democrats accusing other Democrats of fraud. So you can't blame the Republicans, although I'm sure they'll find somehow a way to do that. But I think, let me cut to the chase. These are the people that want to control the national election. Right. And it doesn't make me want to vote anymore for Senate Bill 1. What's your thoughts?
And how do you know whether your vote is actually being counted? Or, of course, in some ways, they're counting it several times because they go through, they drop the lowest person, then they come back and run it through
it's
again.
Crazy.
It's just
so
it's a mess.
crazy.
And of course, for a voter, it leaves a lot of options to say, well, in a ranked choice, I really wanted Andrew Yang, can I put him all 5 times? Or it's a mess.
It is a mess.
Yeah, I wonder if you have to put different ones in all of your 5 choices, or can you repeat, because they come back after the first round
Yes.
and they look at they count the second choice. They haven't counted the second choices yet, and then they count them. So if you had Andrew Yang there again, he's out supposedly. Right?
He dropped out. But think about in Florida in 2000 when we had all the hanging chads and they were going through, and you had people looking at each one of these to see if. But it's just one. You have 2 people you're voting for, but here you have 5, and if you've got. I don't know how you go back and say, all right, we need to go back and do an audit and a recount of this. How do you do that?
Wow.
Because you're going through multiple iterations, if you want to use a big word. And it is the craziest thing. And Penna, back to I guess I'm just kind of a simple-minded person, but I just simply say, and we want these kinds of individuals to do this at the national level, because that's what H.R. 1, now Senate Bill 1, is there to actually nationalize some of this insanity, which actually unfolded right there in the New York mayor's race.
The last thing I just wanted to say about this is that the person that is in first place, Eric Adams, is the person who would support the police, whereas so many, even the second place candidate, she was sanitation commissioner under de Blasio. The third place one right now was a former counsel to Bill de Blasio. So New Yorkers obviously are supporting the person that is going to keep them safe. And he is, I think, the areas of the city that are, a little bit less safe are the ones that supported Eric Adams. So that's an interesting piece of knowledge coming out of that election.
And Democrats are noticing that the pro safety person is in fact doing the best.
Yes, and
I hope
by
they
the
do
way,
notice.
By the way, African American, which I thought was kind of interesting as
and
well.
And a former policeman, I believe.
Yes, ex-cop. That's right. And again, if you find yourself saying, "I'm trying to figure out all of this," we do have this second article posted, and it is written by John Funn. And of course, if
really
you'd like
good.
to hear from John Funn, just stay tuned, because Dr. Merrill Matthews will be doing an interview with him. Which brings me to something we can talk about when we come back from the break. Supreme Court did rule on voting, at least in Arizona. Also ruled on a couple of other issues. So we'll talk about some of these Supreme Court decisions that came down 6-3 right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
This particular section, we're going to focus most of our time and attention on the Supreme Court. You will notice that we have posted two articles on number 3 and 4, but we'll focus on the first one, and that is, Penna, the idea that the Supreme Court has ruled 6-3 to uphold some of the restrictions that were established by the Arizona legislature. And that's not only good news for Arizona, I think it would be good news for this judicial activism that is taking place right now, where the Justice Department has been suing the state of Georgia over their election laws, and it's something that I think states in other parts of the country might be looking at as well.
I think so, too. That probably the question from this ruling would say, would this put a bit of a damper on the challenges to states tightening up their election laws right now? And, of course, this case goes back to 2016. But it's Brnovich, who is Attorney General. He was a Republican Attorney General of Arizona versus the Democratic National Committee. And it upholds two restrictions on voting. One restriction would be requiring residents to vote in their own precinct. In other words, disallowing votes that people's votes that voted in the wrong place. And the second part of it was it bans ballot harvesting, which is people gathering up votes and turning them in. And the Democrats, of course, said that this violates Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and also the 15th Amendment. In other words, it's racist. But really, it has to do with voter fraud. It's to try to control voter fraud. And to go and say that voting in the right precinct requiring that to happen is racist, I think that's demeaning. That's demeaning to other races, not people of color, to say that you couldn't get your act together to vote in the right precinct. So, I mean, this is a really common sense ruling, and I think that it's so good. It's so positive to have this. Of course, the left will disagree. As a matter of fact,
pulled their hair out.
Yeah, they are. And E.J. Dionne, who is a left columnist of the Washington Post, he said, Oligarchy Day at the Supreme Court, and there are two rulings. This ruling, here's what he said. He said that two rulings make it harder for people to vote and easier for big donors to sway elections in secrecy, and that has to do with the disclosure ruling that we'll talk about in a little while in California.
Going back to the Constitution empowers the states to manage their elections.
Right.
That's what the Constitution does. And what the Supreme Court was saying is it is the province of the states to do that, and unless there is something that is egregious there that is really creating some kind of disparity, then we let the states do that. And so if you look at Alito's opinions, he said, well, there may be some, doing some things like voting and requiring you to vote in your own precinct may create a few few little issues for some, but for the most part, this doesn't create a big problem for people.
Yes. And again, a lot of it has to do with the Voting Rights Act. And of course, that's what's being used right now by the Justice Department to come after Georgia. So far, so good. And that hasn't caused the Justice Department to say, okay, I guess we won't file a lawsuit against Georgia. But as a matter of fact, isn't it interesting? They filed this lawsuit against Georgia before this case came down, which tells you how partisan it really was. Because I think, suppose it went the other direction, or in this case, it did go this direction, you would have to maybe amend your filing in light of that. And you would think, well, then if I am the Attorney General, I would want to wait till this comes down before I make the filing. It shows how partisan this
really does.
was.
And I'm sorry.
Ahead. You go ahead.
The New York 22 race that was going on and lasted for so long.
Yes.
If I remember right, one of the issues was there were several people who voted in the wrong precinct.
Right, precinct, yes.
And the Republican was challenging that because it was against New York law. And I think she probably won that challenge there so that those votes were not counted because they were not cast in the right precinct. I think I'm correct on that, but if that's the case, then New York must be every bit as bad as Arizona in requiring people to vote in their own precinct. Now, some states are actually trying to expand this so that you can vote within a city or within a county or something of that nature. But it is not It is not unusual or outrageous or egregious to do that. And I was amazed at hearing how many liberals came up and just sort of, their hair was on fire that this is Jim Crow again and we're suppressing voters.
And it's right there in New York. I mean, that was one of those cases that we cited in that voter fraud booklet. Anyway, go ahead.
You know, when you talk about ballot harvesting, too, and you asked us to explain it, I mean, really, when you think about it, harvesting ballots is just, it really opens things up for fraud, because you could, get the ballots, you could mark a bunch of ballots and turn them in, or you could just go to a place where the people are really old and, perhaps, not really paying a lot of attention and pick up those ballots and, maybe never take them to the poll. I mean, there's so many things that could happen. So having your ballot go from you to the ballot box is the best. It's the best, and the more hands it changes in between just makes it.
And what Arizona does is it allows family members and caretakers and so forth to be able to take that ballot and deposit. Yeah. And this happened with my in-laws. My father-in-law was in a nursing home. My mother-in-law went and took to him the thing she had. It was a little hard during COVID, but she was able to do that, and then she deposited. So you want to be able to have that kind of option, but you don't want somebody to be able to start walking down streets and say, let me have your ballots, I'm going to take it. And it really is insulting to say, we don't think minorities have the ability to be able to go to the polling place and deposit or figure this out or go to the ballot box. It's just, it's insulting.
Crazy. Well, and again, it's all chain of custody. In a criminal trial, we want to make sure that this gun that you are now admitting into evidence actually is the same gun, and it's gone from one hand to another. And of course, when you have a third party collecting the ballots, that is a question. I've even used family members. If I can go back to a movie that some of us remember, It's a Wonderful Life. Remember what happened when Uncle Billy lost track of the $800? And I mean, there is a
$8,000.
Oh, well, yeah, 8,000, whatever. You remember it. You watch it more than I do. Whatever it was $8,000. But he lost track of it all of a sudden because he wrapped it in the newspaper, and also sudden Mr. Potter took it and used it. And so it's just a good illustration that ballot harvesting, Penna, it just makes no sense at all.
It makes no sense.
And yet it's illegal in some states. And so then when they try to have some rules that bring a bit of common sense, we keep hearing voter suppression and all the rest.
And I noticed one of the quotes from one of the election experts that they cited in one of the stories that had their hair on fire. He said, all this is trying to prevent voter fraud when voter fraud is virtually non-existent in the U.S.
Oh, there we go.
And I'm sitting here thinking, do you not read the paper? Do you not look at these things? I don't think it sways major elections, but voter fraud, and the last time I looked, I think Ken Paxton here in Texas had something like 150, 200 cases they were investigating. We don't know where all that will go.
The Heritage Foundation has a whole database of it.
Yeah, that voter fraud happens.
1,285. And when this was published, now it's over 1,300 examples. And Hans von Spakowski says, I'm not even looking at all of them. These are just the ones that showed up in the newspaper.
Now, in fairness, most of those are small numbers. They may be a handful of people. They may be 50 or 100 or something, but it does go on, and fortunately it probably doesn't change many elections, but you want to make sure that you limit that as much as possible.
Well, again, I just have some questions about this whole idea of ballot harvesting. Uncle Billy, maybe he was drinking, but some of these ballot harvesters, they might have been using some kind of controlled substances too, so you just never know.
Well, H.R. 1 that was just defeated in the Senate, the big voting bill it actually specifically legalizes ballot harvesting. And, you can say, well, voter fraud did not cause someone to lose the election. But if you look across the country at all the different things that were done that now states are trying to deal with, like mail-in ballots and just automatically mailing out ballots. I mean, how many votes were cast from that? And they wouldn't specifically maybe call that voter fraud, even though often I think people voted in a ballot that wasn't theirs by mail. It probably did win elections. So you just put all these pieces and parts together, which is what that H.R. 1 bill did. It put all kinds of ways for the left to get votes and all kinds of ways for the left to retain permanent power. They put it into one big bill. Fortunately, it was defeated this time, but that's going to raise its ugly head again.
One more point, since we have listeners in North Carolina, they might remember that we actually had to
Indeed, we
redo
did.
a North Carolina congressional election. We needed a mulligan because of ballot harvesting.
And that was a Republican, I believe.
Yeah, that was one of the few examples that we could actually dig up of Republican voter fraud. Most of the examples we've been using today are Democrats. But, okay, that was a 6-3 decision. There's another 6-3 decision. So we come back from the break. This one has to do now with California. And this was a law mandating that charities disclose some of the biggest donors. And what could that possibly mean? And there are some real concerns about the fact that some of those donors might be doxxed. They might be fired. They might have people protest outside of their house. And as much as I believe in transparency, I think this was, again, a very good decision by the Supreme Court because of the abuse that might have come about because of it. So we'll talk about that with Penna, Dexter, and Dr. Merrill Matthews right after this.
Parents across America are getting wise to the indoctrination that's been taking place in their neighborhood schools through the teaching of critical race theory. Many schools have adopted the 1619 Project, which portrays America as a fundamentally racist nation and makes slavery the central story of American history. As of January 2021, this curriculum was being taught in 4,500 classrooms nationwide. Most parents aren't happy when they learn their children are being taught that America is evil. It's disturbing when your 7th grade daughter tells you, "I don't want to be white." And no parent wants their child encouraged to see himself as a victim because of his skin color. When parents in Texas's Carroll ISD learned their board of trustees had adopted a cultural competency action plan that incorporated these ideas, a group of conservatives got organized, sued to get the program stopped, and in the recent May election replaced 2 school board members, 2 city council members, and the mayor. Other districts are following suit, among them Loudoun County, Virginia, Greenwich, Connecticut, Rapid City, South Dakota. 70% of school board members participating in a Heritage Foundation survey said they do not want schools to use instructional material that places slavery at the center of our national narrative. But obviously some do, and voters need to find out who they are. Heritage's Education Policy Director, Lindsay Burke, points out that informed citizens know a great deal about the candidates at the top of the federal ticket. But, she says, at the bottom of the knowledge base come elected school board members. There are about 14,000 school boards across the nation and about 100,000 school board members. School board members represent the largest group of elected officials in the country. School boards are responsible for deciding on curricula and textbooks. In well-heeled, influential communities, the anti-American left is targeting them to get to students. We need to take their elections seriously. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View.
your listener-supported source for truth.
And once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Many of you who are listening online might have heard Penna Dexter's commentary right now on school board members. We'll talk about that next hour, get into a lot of things happening around the country right now in terms of school boards. But since we were talking about the Supreme Court, we already talked about the election regulations that were established by the state of Arizona. Let's now come to another case coming down by the Supreme Court, and this one is of concern as well. So much so that I think even our friends at First Liberty filed a brief along with this, and it was a 6-3 ruling that actually struck down the idea in California that it would mandate charities having to disclose their bigger donors. So, Penna, tell us what you found.
It was Americans for Prosperity versus Bonta. And, it basically protects the freedom of association from government infringement. And it doesn't apply to donors to political parties. It only applies to donors to nonprofit organizations. And it's really it's recognizing that we need to protect these people because of all the things that happen to them sometimes, especially the large donors that really make an impact on certain issues. I mean, there are bomb threats. And Roberts listed these threats: bomb threats, protests, stalking, physical violence, and of course, as you mentioned, losing your job, getting canceled because of your donation to some organization that supports something everybody that isn't woke. And progressives have been weaponizing these laws. And for instance, one senator, Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, has been going after what he calls dark money. And so, this was these kinds of laws in California. They support his efforts, so he's really mad that the Supreme Court has
this would be the same Sheldon Whitehouse who's member of Whites Only Club.
Oh, yeah, that one. Yeah, the same one.
This has not been a good couple of weeks for him, has it?
No. I just thought it was very interesting how the laws apply to other people, but not to them.
It's so interesting, though, that this particular, the briefs that were filed in this case, as you said, First Liberty filed one, but so did the ACLU.
Yes.
It was across the board protecting nonprofits from having to disclose their donors.
Let's, if we can, maybe put one name on there, Brendan Eich.
Yeah.
And this is an individual that was the co-founder of Mozilla. And correct me if I make a mistake here, but I believe that he was actually making a donation to the idea of defining marriage between one man and one woman in the referendum there in California. And that was enough for them to just basically push him out once they found out that he'd actually donated to that.
Yeah, it was a $1,000 donation.
Yeah,
so he makes it and he loses his whole career. And he's the person that really basically founded, I think it was the Firefox. And
that too.
He was pushed out of his company for that. So, you can see why it was important for the Supreme Court to take this step.
What about the across the board? You got everybody from the ACLU to First Liberty and all sorts of groups in between. Mm-hmm. So you would expect, Dr. Merrill Matthews, that this could be a 9-0 because whenever you get Kelly Shackelford and some of our friends at the ACLU agreeing, you would think that might be one place where you would get a 9-0. But still, you still got that 6-3. What about those three individuals?
It's really important these days because of the cancel culture and because of the violence that some will impose upon somebody if you give money to some other group. It's amazing. So it could have been a 9-3, but it wasn't. I don't understand the rationale behind the 3, but I often don't understand the rationale behind the liberal 3.
I can't give you what Justice Kagan said. She wrote the dissent, but I did. Kim Strassel was writing about both these cases. She said that it was the worst opinion that Kagan has ever written.
Wow.
And, the 3 liberals were definitely on the dissenting side of this.
That's one of the things that's striking because we sometimes hear, especially when Kelly Shackelford gets interviewed or others, well, you just want conservative justices. And he says, no, we want those that are strict constructionists, those who are originalists. And sometimes they will go and actually rule in order to obey the Constitution against some of their own values. And, of course, we've talked about flag burning, for example, Justice Scalia and others where it was kind of difficult with the wife the next day after he ruled on that particular case. But if there's one thing you can predict, Dr. Merrill Matthews, it's these three have been in lockstep almost all the time. And it's almost like, okay, this first case, that came from Arizona. That was a Republican legislature, so three are going to vote against it. But this one came from California and the Attorney General there in California, so we're going to vote for it. And I hardly ever see a liberal swing vote. Do you?
There's virtually never a swing vote. And it's interesting because when these candidates go through the Senate hearings to become a justice, Democrats always ask the question, especially if it's a conservative, we need people who are going to be independent. Are you going to be, vote in lockstep with Trump? Are you going to be vote as a lockstep conservative? And they say no. They may ask the same question of the liberals, but it's the liberals who always vote in lockstep. It's the only independents are the ones who are from the conservative side.
You look back at an earlier ruling of this season. It was a Fulton versus City of Philadelphia. It was a 9-0 ruling that protected the right of the foster agency, the Catholic foster care agency, to only adopt out to people that were, homo or heterosexual couples. So that was unanimous. But the part of it that a lot of people were hoping would be to overthrow the Smith decision, which would have really helped out with a lot of religious liberty cases if that had happened. Mm-hmm. And some of the conservatives on the court did not go there, and others would have gone there. And so you didn't have them all align completely. And then in other cases, you have them completely, the conservatives completely divided on some of the issues. But as you said, the liberals are never divided. Never, almost never.
And the example I used, of course, we see Justice Roberts. It goes all over the map on those. But even more recently, Brett Kavanaugh the other day voted with all three liberals on a case having to do with the whole issue of whether or not to eventually end the exemption on evictions. So you can find examples with anyone on the court that has been appointed either by George W. Bush or Donald Trump that have swayed occasionally. You just can't find anything like that with any of those.
And it's if it's not an ideological thing that's dividing the left and the right, then you'll sometimes see the 9-0 votes. But if it's something that's ideological, falls in that area, they almost always vote with the liberals.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, let's encourage you to read Penna Dexter's commentary today. It's school board members, and we did spend a little bit of time this week talking with our good friend Robert Knight, because he gave us a little bit of an inside look on what was happening there in Loudoun County, Virginia. But Penna has a lot more from Carroll ISD in Texas, as well as a couple other cases that she talks about around the country. And this has been something that has been remarkable. In the past, sometimes we've seen parents protest what is happening in the school board because we teach explicit sex education and sometimes material that is just almost pornographic. And I've seen some of these school boards where somebody reads the material from maybe the middle school or the grade school, and the people on the school board are offended. And you're thinking, you're offended by that? And that's what we're teaching the kids. And so that's been around for some time. But the newest part of that is now more and more also saying, wait a minute, you're teaching critical race theory, and you're teaching some things to tell our kids to hate this country. And I think during the 4th of July weekend, this would be a good time to talk about the value of this country and the fact that we want unity, not division. So when we come back, we're going to spend some time working our way through Penna Dexter's commentary. And then while we're talking about that, I did post a piece by our good friend Rod Dreyer on life inside a woke corporation. Victor Davis Hanson wonders whether the military has lost middle America. So we have a lot more to cover, and we will do that right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn Interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to talk a little bit about the very excellent article and Viewpoints commentary by Penna Dexter, because she points out that parents have become wise to the indoctrination that is taking place in the neighborhood schools. And this is an opportunity for us, Penna, to learn from others that have been successful, and also to stand up for truth and to be really concerned about some of the things being taught to the young people today.
Yeah, well, we're beginning to see parents getting involved across the country when they see the indoctrination taking place of their kids, even in K through 12, through critical race theory. And that's why I wanted to write this commentary and really encourage people to get involved. First of all, see what's going on in your own schools, but then you're probably going to see some of this. But in recognizing it as perhaps another commentary, and it certainly has been discussed on Point of View a lot. But there have been some success stories. One of them we featured a lot here on Point of View, which was Carroll ISD. And what their story tells you is that who is on the school board makes a big difference, because when we had Tim O'Hare, who he was kind of in charge of the PAC that funded all the electoral activity in Carroll. And because they had all this being taught to their kids, they ended up in the May elections replacing 2 school board members, 2 city council members, and the mayor. And they got very organized to do this, because it was really like July 31st of, I forget what year, 2019 maybe, their school board voted to really put in this cultural competency action plan, which is really critical race theory, throughout their curriculum. I mean, it was just everywhere in the curriculum. And so here we are at the end of the summer, and people are on vacation. And so it took a while for the parents to get wind of it. But when they did, they stepped up. I think they picked the wrong district, but they probably picked it. I think they picked these districts if they're sort of well-heeled, sometimes conservative, but where their kids are going to be the kids that may get into the top colleges that may be future leaders, because they're targeting those cities for critical race theory, because it really is indoctrination into Marxism based on race. And so you can see how important this is. It's condom demonstrations, which we fought in Plano back in the 90s. That was bad, and we actually got that stripped out of the school district. And we had to elect school board members to get that done. But this is systemic. It goes across the board. And so to get it out, I mean, I think it's wise that parents now across the nation. You talked with Bob Knight this week about Loudoun County, Virginia, and there's another area where there are people in government that live there. There are lots of wealthy and successful people who want their kids to achieve and do well, but they don't want their kids to have to apologize for their race, or to have to deal with all of this rhetoric about our country being sinful and evil and racist. And so they're fighting there, and they're trying to recall, I think, several school board members in that area. So these things are taking place across the nation, and I think what voters should do is try to, first of all, find out if any of this is going on in your community. And in Carroll ISD, nearby. They did it by going to Open Records Act to get documents. And they found out a lot. They uncovered a lot.
They try to cover their trails.
They try to cover their trails, and doing it in the dark of night, I think, is so disingenuous. But Heritage Foundation has a great gal on education, Lindsay Burke. She's the education policy director, and she says, and this is a quote from her, "Informed citizens know a great deal about the candidates at the top of the federal ticket. But at the bottom of the knowledge base come elected school board members. There are about 14,000 school boards across the nation and 100,000 school board members. School board members are the largest group of elected officials in the nation. We need to be paying attention to who our school board members are, and because they decide on curricula and textbooks. And we need to take their elections very seriously." So that was my encouragement. And I think as we continue to talk about critical race theory, it's so good that parents are getting wind of it now. If it's defeated, which even in the state of Texas, we passed a bill this legislative session banning it. I don't know if that'll really ban it, but, because they try to get in so many ways. But if we win this battle, which we have to win for the future of our country, it will be because parents got so upset about what was happening in their schools and they did something. So my encouragement is get going and start doing something.
And I would add that what this does is it sort of encourages people to get politically active. They may from that say, well, I'm just going to run for the school board position myself because that's the only way I'm going to make a difference. Or maybe I'm going to run for the city council or for the mayor. And I had actually a city council and a mayor candidate about a month ago, Kerby, as we were talking about how important it is for conservatives to run in those areas and begin to affect things at the local level. And then it also gives you that training, that outreach and so forth to maybe if you decide you want to go to the state level or to the federal level, it gives you that training. So it's a good place to start. But Penna mentions one aspect of it with Texas doing this. The states created the federal government. The states created the counties and cities. States can override counties and cities if they want to. So I would encourage state legislators to look at this and say, is this going on in our state? If so, maybe we at the state legislative level should look at what Texas did and impose that from the state down, because states control those cities.
And maybe even the State Board of Education, higher education, those would be some areas, both higher education as well as, of course, secondary education as well. Those are some action points. And Penna, if nothing else, it illustrates why I say that I think the school board elections are some of the most important elections in the country.
And by the way, you don't have to really have any specific kind of career training to be a school board member. I mean, you can't. It's great if you've got people that have done, great things and are experienced leaders. Sometimes it's good to have some former teachers in there. But to have parents who have dug into this stuff, they're the ones that are just so committed. So that's important. And I did notice that this week, the Family Research Council had a boot camp for school board members. And they brought in some great speakers, and they're going to continue to have these to teach people how to get involved. And even if you don't run yourself, I mean, back in the 90s when we had that fight about condoms in our schools, I was the campaign manager for somebody who ran. So I raised the money and I just kind of organized the campaign. And that was my contribution to that battle. And you could just put a sign in your yard if that's all you have time to do.
Or knock on doors.
Knock on doors. And we had rollerblades going around neighborhoods where kids on rollerblades giving out the literature. So there's just a lot you can do. And I think the grassroots is where this one's really got to start, because that's what's going to win the battle.
In the county where I live, somebody was pointing out that the last school board election only had about 15% turnout, which means that if you can just get your church and some other interested friends involved, you could probably win. And I do want to talk a little bit more about critical race theory and how people are responding to it. But let me just, before we end this segment, mention that on Penna Dexter's commentary today, there's also a link to the Heritage Foundation survey, which was put together by Lindsay Burke. So not only should you go to the website and get Penna's commentary, follow the link which we have there, and it will give you some more information. And forearmed is forewarned and ready to go. So we want to empower you to make a difference. I was speaking the other day, and the first guy came up and said, I'm running for the school board. And I said, okay, there we go. Let's take a break and talk about how the response has been to this idea of challenging critical race theory. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, sadly, it has become trendy in some circles to say that the world would be a better place without religion in general and Christianity in particular. I really do wonder if professors, commentators, and people on social media really believe this or just saying it without any serious reflection. As I like to sometimes say to my atheist acquaintances, I see lots of Catholic hospitals, Presbyterian hospitals, and Baptist hospitals. I've never seen a humanist hospital. In his new book, Unimaginable, What Our World Would Be Like Without Christianity, Jeremiah Johnston explains what the world was like before Christianity and what the world would be like without Christianity. He then concludes by talking about the benefits in a world with Christianity. He was in my radio studio talking about the influence of atheism on our world and then concluded by talking about the positive influence from Christianity in our world today. For example, there are an estimated 350,000 religious congregations in the United States, and the vast majority of them serve in some capacity as a community safety net for those in need. We also see churches and faith-based organizations helping out in disasters. So what is the economic impact of faith in America? According to one study cited in the book, religion's $1.2 trillion impact is more than the global annual earnings of Apple and Microsoft combined. Or you can look at it another way. How much do we save in social services because these are performed by faith organizations? Rodney Stark of Baylor concludes that the total current savings to U.S. society is $2.67 trillion. The book's facts and figures are a vivid reminder that the positive impact of Christianity in society is indeed unimaginable. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. What's going on in your school district? Maybe you've already fought some of these battles. We'd love to get some of your comments, although I suspect many of you are getting ready for the 4th of July weekend. But first of all, we have in studio with us Penna Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews. And Penna, I just think it is helpful to let people know that if they go to their school board or they even say something on their Facebook page, there's going to be a pushback. And so we wanted to equip you a little bit in that regard. And one of the arguments being made is, well, you don't know what you're talking about. Okay, I'll be willing to concede that some of the critical comments made by some of these individuals, maybe they don't understand all the nuances of critical race theory. And of course, one of the reasons we have posted many of these articles on Point of View, we've got a booklet coming out on critical race theory, is so we can educate you. But let's face it, some of the individuals that do know about that, that'd be like Christopher Rufo, who has put together a database of more than 1,000 stories that he's put together. And this is not complete. I mean, he's just one journalist, but he's come up with a database of 1,000 stories. So the other argument is it's not being taught. Can't really be said with a straight face, can it?
I don't think so. There's too much evidence out there, and all these parents waking up to it now and rising up is another piece of evidence. I think what happens is, they try to say that conservatives aren't defining it well, and it's really something that just exists in academia, in the law schools. Like, for instance, here's a definition. NBC News said it's the academic study of racism's pervasive impact. The New York Times describes critical race theory as a framework used to look at how racism is woven into seemingly neutral laws and institutions. CNN said that it seeks to understand and address inequality and racism in the U.S. So it's like a filter or a system to study racism. That's how they portray it. But there's so much more to what it is, and I think the service that Christopher Rufo has provided is he's found all the evidences of it, and he's articulated that, so it helps us to recognize it when we see it, because it's in schools, it's in corporations where they're having trainings to teach people critical race theory. It's in the federal government, and I think famously, when Chris Rufo started talking about the training that was happening of employees in the federal government, Trump got wind of that, and he stopped it across the government. Of course, that was short-lived because then he was defeated in the November election, and Biden brought it all back. Then the military, that's another place where this type of Marxist, really it's Marxist indoctrination on the basis of race, dividing us by race, whereas Marxism was more by class. And, you know, if your kid comes home and starts saying that, you know, they're the oppressor because they're white, or they need to apologize for being white, or, you know, it attacks merit. If you are a high achiever, you know, you've got some kind of it's probably because you're white, yeah. Which just isn't true. These things aren't true, but they're things that they're putting into the kids' minds. And so as we start to recognize it, and that's what's been happening, we can rise up and try to stop it.
So if you hear words like equity or meritocracy is a myth because it's we have systemic racism and various kinds of educational programs and things of that nature, Dr. Merrill Matthews, very quickly we can recognize that this is something that parents should stand up for.
Parents should stand up for it, and even some liberals are opposing it. Andrew Sullivan,
no
longtime friend of Point of View necessarily, has a long piece on this where he discusses it, and Andrew Sullivan is a gay person and a liberal, and he's concerned that this sort of wipes out independence and independence of thought and just a range of different things that liberals used to stand for, freedom of speech and other things, and he's taken a stand against it. So it's interesting that you see some of the other side. But, you know, what's happened in the country is we're increasingly, the liberals, the cities turned blue. And now we're seeing the schools begin to try to take these things, which might not have really been a part of that, but the schools are picking up on this, and they're becoming sort of the incubators for blue thinking and liberal thinking and so forth, and you've got to step in there and stop it.
Let me give you one more piece of evidence, and then we'll take some phone calls, by the way, too. 1-800-351-1212. We talked about, of course, Christopher Rufo, a very good imprimis that came out from Hillsdale that you can find, one of the best, by the way, and I quote it even in our booklet. But this development that unfolded the other day, Howard Zinn, everybody remembers Howard Zinn, People's History of the United States. Well, the Zinn Education Project has put together a petition, and now they have a list of more than 4,000 teachers who have pledged to inject critical race theory into their lesson plans. So when people say, oh, it's not being taught, what about this over 4,000 teachers that say, oh, yes, we plan to actually inject it into the school districts?
The teachers' unions had rallies in 22 cities about 3 weeks ago on a Saturday to support critical race theory, and it was organized by the Zinn Education Project. And one other thing that Chris Rufo said was a lot of the teachers, if teachers are older and they've been teaching a long time, often they do recognize this as Marxist indoctrination and they don't teach it. They just try to stay away from it. But if they're 35 and under, if they're young and they've been educated in our universities, they already have been steeped in this. And so it's natural for them. They don't really think they're indoctrinating kids when they teach this. It's natural for them to teach it. So that's one of the obstacles we have is a whole cadre of teachers that that were just already steeped in their universities, and now they're in the schools.
You know, one of the other arguments, and then we will take some phone calls if we can, is that, well, you people don't want to teach about slavery, and that's why you're doing that. You don't want to teach about racism. And Matt Walsh, I think both of you know Matt Walsh, had a great line the other day. He says, no, not only do we not want to teach about slavery, we want to teach everything about slavery, because the way slavery sometimes is taught in the schools right now is like it just started in 1619. Mm-hmm. You know, we never had slavery before, instead of recognizing that we had thousands of years of slavery that existed long before there was even a United States of America, or that some of the slave owners
in
themselves,
virtually every society.
Yeah. Or that there was some of the slave owners were black or Indians that owned slaves. That, as a matter of fact, slavery was still legal, at least in one or two countries, until 1980. Just on and on and on. So instead of saying, no, not only do we not want to teach about slavery, we want to teach all the facts about that. And that, I think, would probably get some people on the left and liberals going, oh, I didn't understand that, because I had this stereotype about the fact that you don't want to talk about the dark chapters of American history. No, I think we want to learn from the dark chapters of American history.
Well, my dissertation spent time in exactly that.
That's where it is.
So I had to read a bunch of that stuff. And interestingly, between 1840 and 1860, you had an awful lot of Americans, white Americans, who were saying slavery is a problem. It doesn't work well. I wish we could get out of this thing, but you had the problem of people who owned slaves, and they had a value in that, and how do you compensate them for that, or so forth? What do you do about that? But it was a major discussion, and an awful lot of Americans at the time wished we could get past slavery so that we could get it out of the system, but they didn't know how to get out of it.
You know, when I was speaking on Monday night, one of the things we got talking about...
We did.
We did eventually. But I was talking about the Declaration of Independence, and I said, I don't think most of you know this, and I found out most of the people in the audience did not know that. The first draft of the Declaration of Independence, put together, of course, by Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Roger Sherman, Benjamin Franklin, everybody, had a line about the slave trade and the king, and, of course, they were actually speaking out against slavery. But, of course, we had the delegates from South Carolina and Georgia that didn't want that in there. But that was actually in the Declaration of Independence. So let's just be honest about all the history. Let's teach all of it, and also point out the fact that we had an abolition movement. There were various colonies that really tried to ban slavery, but could not because they were part of the British Crown, but actually moved shortly thereafter about that. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of the actions that actually did provide an opportunity for African Americans right after the Civil War to vote, before some of that got implemented. Those are all things that are part of American history.
They are. It's a much more complicated than people want to make it out to be.
Yes. And if nothing else, I remember your dissertation on that topic, and maybe we'll get into that in the future. But let's take a break. And since we're talking about this, we might at least mention something about the wokeness warriors. I've got something here about the military, but we also have some other issues on that regard as well, and life inside a woke corporation. So we got a couple more things to cover, but this is the 4th of July weekend. Before we're done, I thought we also might just talk about the reasons we should celebrate this country, its liberty, and why we should make sure all of us, as Penna suggested, have a flag outside of our house, and maybe do what we can to pass on these very valuable lessons to our children and grandchildren. So let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
In studio with me today, Penna, Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews, and we would love to hear from you, 1-800-351-1212. We'll go to, first of all, South Carolina, WHBJ, and Grace. Thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. I just want to weigh in on the discussion about slavery, and specifically critical race theory. I'm Irish American. We did our DNA, and it came back 98.999% Irish. And I'd already done my genealogy. My parents had done theirs, and we came over during the potato famine, and we came as indentured servants, which meant we owed the sponsor 7 years of our lives. And what often happened, and what records we found showed what happened, was that we were taken advantage of. A lot of Irish Americans, Irish that came into this country, were horribly taken advantage of as they were just fleeing Ireland to get out of there. And so often what would happen at the end of the 7 years of indenturement, they would be told, because a lot of them did not read or write and were ignorant, they would be told by the sponsor, oh, you owe us another year, or you owe us another 2 years. And they lived in complete poverty. They were basically enslaved, owed to the sponsor, and they were treated pretty badly. There's some signs that were, or pictures of signs that were posted in windows of stores and pubs that said, no dogs or Irish allowed. Now, we as a people, we as Irish Americans, as a group, a subgroup of America, I like to refer to us as, because we're American first, we don't shine the spotlight on that part of our history. We're very much proud to be here. It took a lot of courage to leave the country that was the country of our birth to come here, and we were very grateful over time to be Americans. And I think if we could just focus on Americanism first, and if we're going to teach, I'm also a teacher, and if we're going to teach slavery, we either teach it in its totality, just as a commentator said, we teach the full scope of it, or we don't teach it at all. Because if we teach it just the way critical race theory says to teach it, then we're teaching one part of it. And the one part shines a very negative spotlight on one racial group, one ethnicity, and it just doesn't work. It just does not work.
Yeah, and it doesn't teach the progression of history, which is how we have dealt with something that was wrong.
That's right. That's right. It takes it out of context.
And, you know, Grace, your point is so important, I think, because it's the general sense is from the critical race theory is that it's whites who oppress blacks. But whites have oppressed whites in Europe. I mean, if you were British, you often thought less of the Spanish or the French. If you were French, you thought less of the Spanish or the British. The British thought less of the Irish. The Irish came over, they're white. And it's much of this that they're considering as whiteness, it was actually, I think, more nationalities or religions, Protestants oppressing Catholics, Catholics oppressing Protestants. It's just much more complicated than that, and I'm so glad you brought that up.
And that's in my history too. We came over as Catholic, and then we're Protestant. That's a whole nother story, a whole nother layer to the American story of us. And so I think we need to focus on Americanism first, the American story. It's okay to focus on how you got here, but you don't need to focus on we just, as a people, we got to change our mindset about this. We really do.
Well, you know, it's a part of your history that you've so beautifully described. And yet, I think as Americans, you also said we're Americans first. And I think what all of this teaching of critical race theory does is it removes the patriotism, it removes the story of America, and it just puts your ethnicity in as the way to identify. And then also you identify with how some other ethnicity has treated you, and so they have oppressed you, and you're forever in that category, and doesn't give opportunity for you to break out of that. And it's really taking us backwards.
And, you know, it's interesting because the critical race theory works if you have people who are black and people who are white and people who are Hispanic. But in fact, the melting pot has been melting a good bit these days. And you have many, I mean, you know, Kerby, when you and I were young, you really didn't see mixed race marriages very often. It's all over the place now, and that's just this culture is changing. So you have whites marrying Hispanics, Hispanics marrying Asians, Asians marrying blacks, blacks marrying whites, and it's increasingly this issue of, well, am I white or am I black? And the Census Bureau is having trouble with this. You know, are you find on there, are you white or are you non-Hispanic white? It's becoming so blended that the notion that we need to find this group here that we can really sort of help reparations and so forth, it's becoming a much more blended country.
Yes. You know, when I first wrote that book, Christian Ethics in Plain Language, I have a chapter on race and point out how much of what we see is very significant is very insignificant genetically. But then I make that point. And when I first wrote it, the example I used was Tiger Woods. Now we got many others. But again, Tiger Woods, what do you click? Asian? Yes. Thai? Yes. Black? Yes. You go down.
Exactly.
I mean, most people can check boxes all the way down the census because of the fact that we have mixed race kinds of marriages now and families, and that I think just obliterates what used to be very clear lines between black and white.
There's this one dad that's in the Loudoun County battle. He kind of woke up to what critical race theory is, and he's got kids in the schools there. And apparently, his kids are biracial. So the son resembles the mother, who is white, and the daughter, and so that son is being told he has white privilege. But their daughter, this boy's sister, resembles the dad, who is more Hispanic. And so, she's oppressed. And so it's just the situation that you're talking about. I mean, it's becoming less and less really relevant in our country to separate people by race.
And we've actually discussed this issue. There's a proposal that, for instance, for symphonies, that you would only allow blacks to compete for new openings in symphonies because blacks tend to be underrepresented in major symphonies. But then you have that question of, well, how do I know that you are, I mean, if you can see you're black, but was Barack Obama, he's half black, half white. If there had been one more in there, then he's a quarter. Does that person get to compete as a black person for the symphony, or does it have to be? Do you have to be full black? And now we're back to what was going on in the old South. Of if you've got, if I remember right, 1/16, if I remember right, of your blood is black, then you're black, or maybe that was when you are no longer black. It becomes crazy to try to start doing this.
It certainly does. I've got some more phone calls, so if you don't mind, we're going to keep moving.
Let's do it.
Keep this train on the road because we have many other questions. So let's go to South Carolina again, and this is Columbia, South Carolina. Mike, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me. I was curious about what kind of response you could have when people are saying that the efforts to make sure that critical race theory is not taught in schools and stuff is a defense and maybe a perpetuation of racism these days.
Well, I would simply say, and again, I'll go around the round table, if indeed you want to address this issue of racism, let's address it carefully and accurately. But when you've had a society where anytime I disagree with you, I say it's racist, I've said this about things other than race. When everybody is Hitler and everything's the Holocaust, then you demean the issue of the Holocaust and the evil of it. And the same thing I would say is that right now we have racism overused so much that it really has no meaning anymore. And to come back and to accurately identify somebody who is engaged in some kind of racist thought, I think is going to be a lot smaller than the number of people that get called racist if they are disagreeing with some statement made by the so-called woke left.
Right, and you get you're so careful about what you say, you can't say anything anymore because you're afraid it will be considered racist by saying something like that.
Yeah, and I think that the other dangerous part in the schools is things, if you do well in school, for instance, if you study a lot, then you are, you're too white. And, so black kids are maybe encouraged not to try to better themselves because, they would rather just keep them in this certain
because
category.
math was created by white people.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's just ridiculous. It really is ridiculous, and it's destructive. And that's why we have to remember that there is an element in the country that does want to destroy our system. And it's not just a matter of improving it. They want to completely tear it down and change the structure of it. So it's not individual racism, it's systemic racism that they're worried about. And that means you need to wipe the whole thing out.
We'll be right back.
Parents across America are getting wise to the indoctrination that's been taking place in their neighborhood schools through the teaching of critical race theory. Many schools have adopted the 1619 Project, which portrays America as a fundamentally racist nation and makes slavery the central story of American history. As of January 2021, this curriculum was being taught in 4,500 classrooms nationwide. Most parents aren't happy when they learn their children are being taught that America is evil. It's disturbing when your 7th grade daughter tells you, "I don't want to be white." And no parent wants their child encouraged to see himself as a victim because of his skin color. When parents in Texas's Carroll ISD learned their board of trustees had adopted a cultural competency action plan that incorporated these ideas, a group of conservatives got organized, sued to get the program stopped, and in the recent May election replaced 2 school board members, 2 city council members, and the mayor. Other districts are following suit, among them Loudoun County, Virginia, Greenwich, Connecticut, Rapid City, South Dakota. 70% of school board members participating in a Heritage Foundation survey said they do not want schools to use instructional material that places slavery at the center of our national narrative. But obviously some do, and voters need to find out who they are. Heritage's Education Policy Director, Lindsay Burke, points out that informed citizens know a great deal about the candidates at the top of the federal ticket. But, she says, at the bottom of the knowledge base come elected school board members. There are about 14,000 school boards across the nation and about 100,000 school board members. School board members represent the largest group of elected officials in the country. School boards are responsible for deciding on curricula and textbooks. In well-heeled, influential communities, the anti-American left is targeting them to get to students. We need to take their elections seriously. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that we do have a very good article by Rod Dreyer, Life Inside a Woke Corporation, which we probably will not get to. And I might also mention a very good piece as well, Has the Military Lost Middle America? Very similar to a commentary I have coming out next week.
Sounds like another whole show.
Yeah, Michael Berry and all the rest. And speaking of another show, not only will Dr. Merrill Matthews have John Fund, but you also got David Keene, and there was a very good piece by John Lott, The School That Wasn't There. So I'll let them tell you the story. Invited 2 individuals for what supposedly was a graduation commencement, and it was all a setup.
All a hoax.
And so I'll just let, I'll not steal your thunder. I'll let you get into that there on, I guess it's July 13th. But let's take another phone call real quickly. And we'll go to Georgia this time, Thomasville, Georgia. Christy, what would you like to ask?
Hi, I have a 5-year-old son who is enrolled to start school this year for the first time. He's been at home with me for the last 5 years. And my question is, how do I go about finding out if the school that he's enrolled in, which is a charter school, a local charter school, teaches the critical race theory?
Good question.
Very good question. Let me give you a couple buzzwords, and that's not just for you, but anybody out there. We've mentioned a few. Equity is one of those. Equity is not equality.
Right.
Equity is that those who are privileged have to give to those who are underprivileged, and so that's almost like a restitution or something like that. One of the key buzzwords, which we haven't mentioned yet, is culturally responsive teaching. Christopher Rufo talked about that, and as a matter of fact, Stanley Kurtz talks about how even in this Civics Secures Democracy Act that even some Republicans have been endorsing, they talk about culturally responsive teaching and learning, but that's a real buzzword for critical race theory. So when you start hearing about that, or the kids, sometimes even the first grade are supposed to deconstruct their racial and sexual identities. Okay, boop, 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 that should tell you something right there. Or where there are trying to locate themselves on an oppression matrix. Those are just a couple. Matter of fact, again, a lot of that is in a booklet we have coming out. So if you are a donor to Point of View, probably you'll get the critical race theory booklet.
And Christy, I'll just mention, you may think, I think you said a 5-year-old there.
Yeah.
You may think, well, that I won't hear that from my 5-year-old. That a 5-year-old's too young. No, you may very well hear some of those things for a 5-year-old.
When they come home and they say, I feel bad about being black, or I feel bad about being white, or I feel bad about this country, or I hate this country, or I hate that I'm white. They'll just make all sorts of statements like this. Then you know that somebody has been dealing with them on a racial level, right?
That's right. Here's a couple of other, buzzwords you might hear. You might hear that we're a systemically racist country.
Of course.
If you hear that, then that's indicative that this could be critical race theory. And then if you have any kind of clues that your child is being taught that racism pervades all our institutions in our country and our beliefs and our everyday practices, and that also American culture is a conspiracy to perpetuate white supremacy. Members of minority groups must never assimilate. So it's really dividing. So if you hear things that sound like they're dividing races from each other, even in kindergarten, if you hear of any ways they are doing that, that would give you a clue. Also, one other principle of it is white people received unearned privilege at birth, while other Americans are denied it. I can see that being taught in some ways in kindergarten. And meritocracy is a myth. We talked about that. And also that color blindness is not a good concept to be following.
Sure. So, Chris, I hope that helped a little bit. And again, for some of our listeners, if that list came too fast and furious, some of that's on the websites here as well. Let's pick out another caller that would like to remain anonymous, calling in from Charleston. So what would you like to add to our conversation today?
So, Chris, I hope that helped a little bit. And again, for some of our listeners that listen.
Go ahead.
Is that me?
Yes, you're on.
Well, I'm a Native American ancestor. My grandfather was Native American. And the thing is, you don't hear anything about the injustices done to Native Americans, even though, and we understand that because America is the best place to be.
Sure. The Trail of Tears,
we hear a lot about
Indian
that.
Wars and all the rest. And in some respects, that is a real concern. By the way, if you go to probe.org, which is, of course, where I'm with the Probe Ministries, we did a week of radio programs on slavery and racism. We did a week of radio programs on the Indian Wars and those kinds of things. There are some very sad chapters in American history, but I have heard Native Americans say, when do we get any kind of attention here? Because almost all the focus is on what happened to African Americans, and yet there are some really sad stories, of course, that happen to Native Americans as well.
Yeah, and I appreciate your calling in and bringing that up. And I think more information is, sunlight on history, but telling all of history is important. And also, I think we have to admit that we're not a perfect country. And, we have made mistakes.
We've made some big mistakes
Yes.
over the years.
And we haven't corrected every mistake. But why do we have a couple million people coming in illegally trying to get to America? I mean, we're still a great country, and we're not a perfect country. And none of us is going to be perfect. until Christ comes back to live with us here.
But
on
again,
Earth.
find me a multi-ethnic country like the United States that has more opportunity and liberty than we have, and I can't find it.
And we are probably the most concerned about our past and the wrongs than any other country that I've seen.
Well, you're allowed to say it.
Mm-hmm.
You're allowed to talk about the evil in the U.S. I mean, think about China.
Yeah.
They don't even know. A lot of people are not even allowed to utter the word Tiananmen.
Yeah. And again, Michael Medved, he always starts his program out by the greatest country on God's green earth. And people every once in a while come up to me and say, "Do you still think it's the greatest country?" And he always says one very quick question to them. Can you think of a better one? I mean, really, think about that. And I don't want to be my country right or wrong, but I want to recognize that if you talk about the amount of opportunity and liberty that are here, we don't have a fence at the southern border to keep people in the country. We have a fence on the border to try to keep so many people from coming in. Or you go back and think of the wall that was there in East and West Berlin. Both the soldiers were facing the same direction. The ones in East Germany were facing towards the east because they did not want East Germans and people in East Berlin to getting into West Berlin or West Germany. And the West Germans were facing that same direction because they were protecting themselves from what the East Germans might have said. So it tells you something about when you have a wall, which side of the wall are people coming onto? And just think of the millions of people that have immigrated from every country in the world to the United States.
And a lot more coming right now.
For sure.
That's another show.
That is another show on immigration. First of all, let me just simply say that I will be here next week, but I won't be here all of the week, so there will be an opportunity for some of the speakers and guest hosts, and we will the following week have Dr. Merrill Matthews will be on. Boy, I've promoted your July 13th special that will be covering a lot of different topics. Penna Dexter, of course, will be covering that Thursday and Friday. And if nothing else, I want to encourage all of you to enjoy the 4th of July. This is the 4th of July weekend. Great time to celebrate and great time to look at the fireworks. But maybe, as you suggested at the very beginning, Penna, a time to put out a flag and teach some of this to our children and grandchildren.
I think so.
Well, thank you both for being here, and I want to thank Andrew for his help behind the scenes as the engineer. Steve was out today, so we have Ivy covering the producer's chair, and if we did not get your phone call in, it isn't because we don't like you, we just didn't have enough time. Also, you will notice we didn't get to all the articles, but I think you should read those as well. Penna Dexter's commentary today, very good one for you to read. I would encourage you to read it, and I encourage you to have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.